And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have three of my good brothers. We have the man who was able to check himself out of leaf therapy, and the man who will probably be checking himself into raptor therapy in a few months, good brother Cure. We have the man who has the biggest grin for having two winning home teams in the worst 2 years of our lives. Good brother Shades, and we have the man of 1,000 runes and the CEO of Sadare Enterprises. Good brother Xanatrix. How the fuck are we doing tonight?
Well, I don't watch sports ball, so I'm not salty about anything today.
I'm in the similar vein, but with the opposite reaction because it's my home team, and I have to smile a little bit at the fact, especially after finding out that our boys didn't just win; they whooped their asses tonight.
Yep. Now
I'm already missing a different moniker you usually give me, Mildred.
The only look, I try and mix these things up sometimes, man. The only downside for me, this unfortunately means that Antonio Clown has a ring.
A sacrifice had to be made.
For the greater good, sacrifices must be made.
The greater good. Shut it!
Him or Le'Veon Bell?
I don't hate Le'Veon Bell as much because he did that massive holdout, but you could just be argued that he just wanted a bigger paycheck.
Rick, Rick, did you bet against the Bucks too?
I think he did. He's going on the bender.
Down
How
here,
much
salt
did you
is a way
lose?
of life.
Okay, how much did he? Okay, what did he lose?
Now, remember, everybody, so long as you don't touch the monk's stash, there's plenty of liquor to go around.
Drink with
Rick,
Oh, that's right. Rick's home team.
Rick, are you sure you should be going with the sad barbecue? You might end up choking on the bones.
All I gotta say is I feel for our buddy Spade Ace. He's got to deal with the freaking craziness in Tampa this the next day or so. Anyway,
I wonder if they're going to do moving screens for the Super Bowl parade. That would be funny to watch. Just instead of crowds of cheering fans, you have screens like you'd see in say Thunderdome or something like that.
oh God,
Just moving across a street.
can we please just get beyond Thunderdome?
Boo!
Thank you. I'll be here all week. Let's get this shit started.
Okay, so it's been a hot minute since we talked about giant robots, or rather, not as much of a hot minute for me talking about giant robots, given who I had on earlier today. And yes, I will note that unfortunately I did bring up the Moab mech, and one of them was taking notes.
You brought up mine. You see, I told you a scout mech that can Moab you from wherever is the best idea.
Yeah, and given how they are very active with their community, if a light war machine that can fire big fucking Moabs ends up in a future installment, we called it.
We called it, and it's all my fault. Thank you.
Oh,
Jesus. You can thank me for the blessings I've bestowed upon you.
Great kid, don't get penisy.
Mm-hmm. But I wanted to those of you who are mad at the image and the title of this particular episode, I was aiming for that. But I wanted to talk about the fulcrum on which so much of the meta of Gundam turns in the form of Char Aznable. Now, I'm not going to do the Char did nothing wrong because that's too easy. But I for the longest time have felt that even that one of the many Char clones that have shown up over the years, some of them being a bit more literal than others. Hi, Full Frontal.
Yes.
I will still never get over that fucking name.
Full Frontal, the best Char clone.
But then I ended up thinking about the other incarnations, and as most Western Gundam fans did, I ended up going back to Wing, and I realized, you know what? Despite his faults, Zechs manages to be a lot more than just a Char clone. And thus the title was born. Zechs Merquise, the better Char than Char.
What about Raul Crusade from Gundam Seed?
What about Raul Crusade?
Gotta walked into that one there, Char.
The guy who decided to go full psychopath in the last third.
I was expecting, to be honest. I had to bring that up, to be fair.
Well, I would like to point out that Gundam Seed was technically seen as a way to try and reimagine Mobile Suit Gundam for a modern day. So if you want to say Raul Crusade is a Char clone, this is almost as literal as Full Frontal. Almost.
Actually, a friend of mine, he had 3 Char clones. Well, technically 2, because Moo Frog is technically a Quattro Vagina clone.
No.
We're not talking about 4 vaginas. We're just talking about Char.
Hang on.
I'll go sit in the corner now.
No, Cure, it's okay.
You know, at least most interpretations try to be cute about the spelling. Then I remember that Zeta Gundam video game I saw footage of that was on the PS1, and they outright spelled Quattro's last name the way we have memed it for so long.
Yep.
But I look at now, obviously for a lot of us, I'd say the majority of us, Wing was our gateway drug when it came to Gundam, and I think, and it's very interesting because I think much like Big O, you had a case where something that didn't exactly do well in Japan ends up doing well in the States due to the benefit of timing and a brand new kind of audience.
But unlike Big O, this didn't lead to a second season.
No,
No.
I don't think that was ever going to be in the cards.
Oh, of course not.
And of course it led to another role for our Lord and Savior Scott McNeil.
Yes.
Yay!
But I look at Gundam Wing as their attempt at experimenting. In fact, before we went live, I had asked about the previous ones in chronological order because obviously I had gotten into the Gundam series out of order, much like a lot of us did. Partially because good chunks of it weren't translated until years later. In fact, it was only like 5 months ago that I finally saw F91.
F91 is so good too.
And certain shows I knew about, like Zeta and Double Zeta, I never saw a translation of. But after Tomino left or was kicked off, depending on who you ask, we ended up getting G, which despite its success was in some ways was Sunrise giving a giant fuck you to Tomino.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's be honest here. All G Gundam is a wuxia novel in giant robots. That's all it is.
And
Not saying that's a bad thing. Just it's not it. It is not Gundam in any sense of the word. It is a super robot show pretending to be Gundam.
Although I think
it still has its politics.
It does.
I think the success that they had with that prompted Sunrise to try and experiment in other ways. And in the case of Wing, that experimentation was to do more of a character focus than anything else. And even though there's been character drama and melodrama throughout Gundam for years, it was always within a certain umbrella and never really focused on ensembles in the same sense. Like
except for Gundam 00.
Hey, that's my favorite.
Actually, it just dawned on me. From G Gundam to, I want to say maybe 00, because I think Unicorn is when it finally started to go back to its roots, and then it completely shifted again to the build series.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, IBO, Iron Blooded Orphan, still exists in UC.
Oh yeah, that's true too. But I would say the period between G Gundam and 00 was kind of a odd period of experimentation for the Gundam franchise. And thinking about it, it's very much parallels another franchise that did the same thing during almost a similar time period. And
Where you
you're gonna laugh at what I'm about to say.
Are we?
Kamen Rider.
Yep, I expected that answer.
How did I know?
Actually, I'm not going to dispute this because we covered this exact thing when we did the Riku Sanjo tribute.
Yep.
Exactly.
I'm assuming with this you're referring to the Phase 1 Heisei era.
Bingo.
I would
Some of those experiments were really good too.
But the fact is that when it in both cases when it came to the experiments, I'd say both companies were throwing things at the wall, but never fully committing to a certain direction to a point.
Yeah.
Because obviously with Gundam, they ended up going into a bunch of different directions after Wing. Because I think after Wing had come around, didn't they kind of tool around with doing a few more UC things before Seed? I'm trying to remember what came in between.
There was
Wing
Turn
and
A.
Seed.
Turn A, I believe, was in UC, if I remember correctly.
Well, Turn A is okay. No, Turn A is what's called the Black History, and it's what Tomino tried to do to consolidate all currently existing alternate timelines into a single timeline.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the Black History is cool. The idea that the Black History is all at once the Mobile Fighter history, the Mobile Report history, and Mobile Suit Gundam was retarded.
I think we're forgetting one, Gundam X. Why is everybody keep forgetting that one?
I was actually going to bring up Gundam X, but we were talking specifically UC stuff, and Gundam X is not UC.
Yeah, Gundam X is its own thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I was going to bring up Gundam X as part of their experimental phase, because, yeah, I haven't watched all of it, but I saw a good chunk of Gundam X. Not bad.
Yeah.
What's really funny is that Gundam X still has new types, but it's not Universal Century.
Yeah.
Like 0079, it also got canceled.
Which again goes back to that whole trying to experiment, but not willing to commit to an experiment.
Yeah, V Gundam was also in this early '90s timeline. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
That's true. So, also to make a side note here, like I pointed out earlier about how Seed was supposed to be some reimagining for the modern era of what Mobile Suit Gundam was. 00 was actually supposed to be a reimagining of the modern era for what Wing was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure if 00 succeeded on that front.
00 succeeded in getting the whole autonomous intervention force from space thing, and then they ran with their own ideas. And
Yeah.
I think that was actually the best way to do it.
As
an homage.
I can certainly go with that because I'd say the big aside from some of the other problems that happened with Seed, one of the big problems is trying to do this whole reimagining thing is setting yourself up for failure. But when it came to something like Wing, I will freely admit that I would love to have been a fly on the wall in the conversation when it comes to why they ended up giving Toonami that particular series. I'm guessing it has to do with the fact that nobody really had it. No, there wasn't really a lot of high hope that this whole Toonami experiment would even work.
That, and when you look at it, they wanted something that was close to what Gundam was, because G Gundam was anything but. So they wanted to test with something that was similar, but they didn't want to go all the way back to the original Gundam because it would have looked way out of place.
Mm-hmm.
And any of the following seasons prior to G Gundam were all on that same timeline. So you would have needed to seen most of the other franchise to kind of be able to keep up with any of it. So it was kind of the best they had.
Yeah, but I look at the other a lot of the other entries in that first generation era of Toonami, And the sole reason I'm bringing Toonami up in a lot of this is that it's kind of necessary when you're having any conversation about Wing, especially with Western anime fans. Um, it in a weird way it reminds me of the Marvel Knights situation. Because as I've mentioned in the past, the Marvel when Event Comics started the Marvel Knights brand, they weren't given top tier characters. They were given Black Panther, Daredevil, the Inhumans, and the Punisher. And while some of you might be fans of some of those characters, you have to admit that those aren't exactly the draws.
They're not the banner marquee names. No.
They're not the flagship characters that everybody knows.
Yeah. And they ended up turning those into either well-regarded runs, or at the very least in the case of the Inhumans, Eisner Award winners. The only one of the Marvel Knights project that didn't land at first was the Punisher, which Linkara did a whole video on that initial run, where they tried to make Punisher a more supernatural foe. And it didn't work. They rebooted it, gave it to Garth Ennis, and that worked. But you look at the anime that they gave. The only one that I'd say that I could see a studio having any real faith in of that initial bunch was Sailor Moon. The others had either weren't doing well in Japan or had some sort of baggage. Cowboy Bebop, as we talked about in the first GeekWatch, almost got canceled.
Almost.
Yeah, it caused a lot of controversy in Japan. And Big O was not well received at all, largely for being the exact opposite of Sunrise's work.
Which is funny because they weren't the only mecha studio around, and let's be honest, Big O, being the noir that is about it can be matched in its darkness and depressive attitudes by a little known mecha anime called Ra Zephon.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, the glorified Redeem remake.
I mean, except much, much darker than Radiant.
Also having a much better ending than Ava. Fight me.
Argument here.
I don't think anybody's gonna fight you on that one, Meldra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the point is that in both cases having a in each of these cases, like I said, the only one that was a fairly established brand by that point was Sailor Moon. And I'll probably end up going into detail on a future GeekWatch solely focused on Toonami. That being said, when I look at the experiment when it came to Wing was definitely ensemble, character-focused melodrama. As you look at, while there's certainly been ensemble casts in Gundam up until this point, a lot of it was still rooted in a protagonist and their rival. Like Gundam,
And how those two.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and how those two are basically the avatars for the whatever conflict is occurring in the show.
Yeah. Amuro being a representative of being the avatar of the Federation, and Char being the avatar of Zeon in that case. Although that's obviously a massive simplification of the matter.
I mean, no, not with Char. Being an avatar of Zeon is literal in that case.
It's just a matter of which Zeon are we talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
But when it came to, and there was a similar regard with this, even with G. I'd say G was when they were starting to tease the idea of doing a full-on ensemble cast. but for the most part, the focus was still going to be on Domon Kashun.
Yeah.
Domon
He-
Kashu and his constant have you seen this man? Kyoji!
Yeah, exactly.
Mark Goffa, if you hear me, I miss you. Please come out of dentistry to voice Domon Kashu once again.
How
They tried
never-
to find a sound alike for a lot of the games, the later games, like the Dynasty Warriors Gundam games. They did not do a very good job.
Which is why I play all of the games that have G Gundam in Japanese, because they still have Tomokazu Seki. Yes, Seki Tomokazu.
Yeah. But when it comes to with Wing, I'd say this was a case where they were doing a full-on ensemble with several characters that were going on different arcs. Yes, while there technically was still the focus on Hero Yui as the main protagonist, the focus wasn't as well focused as it had been in previous instances, because you did have different arcs with the other characters, and there would be multiple times where you'd have entire episodes that didn't feature Hero.
And again, like I said with Gundam 00, the same thing happened there. Setsuno wasn't the focus all the time. You actually got quite a few arcs with Lock On, Alleluia, and Hallelujah, and Tieria.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But again, they were clearly trying to be a kind of a modernized version of Wing anyway, so it all kind of comes back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I say I think Gundam 00 did that reimagining thing when it comes to Gundam best.
Mm-hmm.
They took the basic premise of character-driven ensemble of peacemakers invading from outer space that are, third party technically, and then they twisted it and made it its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it came to, but obviously ever since the popularity of the original Char becoming the Japanese Darth Vader in some instances, it was inevitable that trying to repeat that lightning would happen, and that brings us to Zechs Merquise, who the funny thing is that a lot of people have this mindset that somehow the message with Gundam is war bad, peace good, except that is incredibly simplistic.
It's also wrong.
Yeah.
Tomino's point at the time he made Mobile Suit Gundam was war is hell.
Yeah.
And he didn't really have anything beyond that.
And he made it explicitly clear that both Federation and Zeon in that case had shit in their yard.
Yeah,
Zeta Gundam kind of really exemplified that.
Mm-hmm.
Zeta and Double Zeta, the Double Zeta had the power of friendship overcoming all the bullshit because, the Junkers are apparently better than everybody else.
Yeah.
Oh, side note about that, Gundam Astray, Double Zeta.
Yeah.
What the Stargazer?
But Wing for me has a kind of spin on the concept by looking at it by trying to look at it psychologically. In the case of a lot of the pilots and the like, the notion of so much of their life has been identified by having an enemy to fight that if they don't have that, who are they? But one conflict that I think a lot of people either misinterpret or just ignore is the conflict between the ideals that someone like Treize Kushernada had and the ideals of the Romfeller group. Treize is definitely not a good person, but he embodies a kind of old-fashioned warrior code. I'd say
Yeah.
to an extent.
Side note, I really just want to take this moment to tell everyone who ever mixed up Zechs and Treize or thought they were the same character to absolutely eat shit and die.
Oh my God! Seriously, there were people who actually did that. What the fuck?
It was all over my school, all over. Oh, I love Zechs, and I'm like, oh, you like the blonde guy who is, trying to follow his warrior code friend and helping him achieve his ideals, even if he doesn't always agree with them. No, the cool guy with the half cape and the brown hair. I'm like, Treize, you fucking morons.
God, I never saw that happen, but I feel for you.
Yeah.
But yeah. Treize, he was a bad guy. He clearly had ambitions of, conquest. Well, I wouldn't say conquest, but just, piece through his own control.
Mm-hmm.
I think would be the best way I could summarize it. But he didn't want to do it through dirty tactics. He would do almost anything, but not anything. There were things that even he felt was too far. He wanted, when he wanted an honorable victory.
Whereas someone like the ROM filler group was very much war as a business, and even to the point of utilizing unmanned mobile dolls. There
were many.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. I think I was going to disagree with your point because there was many. Like they made a very good job at establishing very early on that many of the Romfellers people outside of Oz were very corrupt, very greedy, very just do whatever it takes to win because we should be the ones in control.
Mm-hmm. Of course,
they established them as assholes.
Yeah, and of course, at the top of Mount Asshole is the Barton family.
Oh.
Yes, the Barton.
Of course, we didn't get to really see how the Barton family was until the movie, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And I'd also like to point out that in certain side materials in which Treize has reappeared, and these side materials are Ban Presto side materials, so they're technically a form of side canon.
Mm-hmm.
He, such as in Gundam Battle Assault 1, when he appears as the final boss, he says that he's trying to have war help change the history of humanity and is willing to become the ubiquitous bad guy that everybody turns against. He kind of pulled a Lelouch before Lelouch existed.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
And in the end, obviously he doesn't die in Gundam Battle Assault 1, because in Battle Assault 2, he's the pilot of Epion.
Yeah. And when it comes to the reason why someone like Treize is important to this particular debate is the fact that he is in a lot of ways he is the fulcrum for so many different characters, whether it be his friend or his assassin. And I do remember seeing a comment on Bonsai Pop's video on Gundam Wing where it was stated that Wu Fei was a good soldier, but not a good pilot.
Yeah, Wu Fei was the least skilled of the main five, definitely.
He clearly was not designed. He was clearly not trained as a pilot per se. It's just that because he was such a great warrior, and really that whole clan didn't really have much of the way of pilots, he still ended up being best suited for the job.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why when he had that one-on-one duel with Treize, that ended up being one of his best scenes.
Yeah.
Well, the implication is that Treize let Wu Fei kill him, though. And let's be real here. That whole scene makes it look like Treize just kind of throws himself on Ultron's trident.
Which given what happens after the fact would certainly make sense, but the further reason in the case of Zechs is the fact that throughout the whole time, Zechs is a man caught between worlds. Because on one hand, he has his position as Oz's ace pilot, and the person who's willing to take up the dangerous mantle of being able to utilize the Tallgeese. On the and later on the Tallgeese too, and eventually the Epyon, which, as an aside, Shades, good choice on using the Epyon for this instead of the Tallgeese 2.
I gotta correct you on that.
Tallgeese 3.
Tallgeese 3.
Zechs
Oh, yeah.
Trey's used the Tallgeese 2.
Yeah, Trey's used the Tallgeese 2, and Zechs uses the
apologies.
1 and the 3.
But between that and the pacifist ideals of the Peacecraft family, and I will admit that I do enjoy the fact that he says that without the mask he's not Zechs Merquise. So you might be able to blame that for the fact that in a lot of my writing I tend to have somebody operating under some sort of false name. Of course, you could also blame Orphan for that, but who's counting?
Well, it makes sense in terms of the story. Like he did want to separate himself. Like he was not representing the Peacecraft family when he was fighting with Oz. He was representing his own personal ideas, and that's why he donned the guise of Zechs Merquise.
Mm-hmm. But as it goes further on in the end, and he ends up having to pick a particular side because of where things end up going. It would be hard pressed for anyone to say that he relishes in the choice that he made, or it's more of a case of this was the choice that seemed to have the best option when you crunch all the numbers, or not the best choice, but the least worst.
Yeah, he chose the lesser of evils.
Mm-hmm. And in a weird way tried to become something similar to what his friend was. You know, the villain that everyone could unite against. But up until that point, there was one of the other major questions that was asked was whether or not humanity is even capable of maintaining peace, or whether or not a lack of an enemy would create a loss of identity.
There are a lot of stories that go to great lengths to unite humanity's disparate elements against a singular outside antagonistic force because of the belief that there's no way to unite humanity otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like such a fatalistic point of view.
It can be a little bit much. But I think one of the bigger aspects that when it came to Zechs and in comparison to Char especially is what caused them to reach their breaking point. Because that is the crux of both of their stories, is that at some point, both of these characters, through whatever forces that caused them, reach a point where they essentially snap. And that's where we see, like we mentioned with Zechs here, deciding to become that enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Though, and I think that's actually where I think this whole argument that Zechs is the better Char actually plays in his favor, because both of them had already started going down that path. Sorry.
Well, the bigger one, I think, that makes Zechs a better Char than Char, as per the premise, is Zechs never set his viewpoint in stone.
Yeah.
I mean, with Zechs, he eventually acknowledges that the Gundam 5 are more suited to installing their version of peace on the world than what he was striving for when he's defeated by Hero again. Whereas Char seems to be going that way. Amuro again at the end of of Mobile Suit, and in Zeta he decides to go by an alias to see the other side in order to find out where the good medium is. But then, come Char's counterattack, he's decided there is no good medium. We're just going to drop an asteroid on Earth. Everybody get off. This is the best way.
I was dancing around it long enough. Let's rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Char's counterattack.
This is where I think all of us agree that this argument wins for Zechs, because it comes down to, for Zechs, it was a combination of many factors that led to his eventual snapping. But for Char, it was one specific moment, and it was a personal one. And that's with Lala.
Except with Lala, after his defeat at the hands of Amuro, he goes to being this more mild-mannered guy in Zeta. I think that it was Lala, and then it was Camille. Camille being, brain-warped by the O at the end of it all, because it overloaded the biosensor with literally the souls of the dead. Yes, apparently the biosensor and new types can gather the souls of the dead for a final attack, but the backlash destroys your brain. Because Tamino.
Yeah, I think it's those two characters and their eventual fates that just finally caused him to snap like a twig and go on his basically psychotic killing spree, or at least attempted one.
The problem is from point A to point B in that case is, and this is a problem that I see a lot of bad writers doing, where they think that someone's personal alignment is effectively an on-off switch.
Mm-hmm.
You'll note that this is going to be my one when it comes to wrestling, and if Maddie was here, he'd probably back me up on this, but you look at the bad heel turns in wrestling, and it's always the ones that come right the hell out of nowhere with no build-up.
Yeah, that's what makes it such a sudden and jarring turn for him. But then we switch over to Zechs, and with him, everything was building up to that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because you had this things with him and Oz going on for a while, and then slowly but surely he starts to take issue with even how Oz is doing things, and gets coerced to becoming the leader of the White Fang. And then he starts to develop more because he doesn't have his friendship with Trace to kind of guide him and help keep him tamed.
Mm-hmm.
You start to see him more, and then throw in the Epion, which draws out that psychosis in him.
Thanks, Zero System.
Yep, that Zero System.
Because that is the Epion 2, which was stupid.
Yeah. That brings out that psychosis that was already building in him and eventually causes him to go down that path. But again, it's all built up to that point. And and even with the Epion, you immediately start to recognize, you could see how someone like Zechs could go this way.
Mm-hmm. And because of that, it wasn't a case of a on-off switch, but more of the, as cliche as the term is, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
And I think, if you don't mind me bringing up Waltz, I think that's the reason why when he shows up again in Waltz, the first thing he does is ask for a code name.
Yeah. He wants to distance himself from not only Zechs Merquise, but also because he had been in the White Fang, he went back to his original name, Milliardo Peacecraft. He didn't want to be associated with either of those anymore. This was a whole new life, a whole new identity. This was a whole new him. Mm-hmm. And so he needed a new name.
Yeah. His issue with taking the Peacecraft name, though, was that he always believed he couldn't live up to his father's vision of creating a world where war is not needed. And so that's in the beginning, that's the entire reason he dropped the Peacecraft name while working under Oz. Mm-hmm. The only reason he picked it up back under White Fang was because White Fang wanted it for name recognition.
Exactly. Though I think part of him never liked that idea from how he acted about it.
He
he
very clearly throughout used the name as a mask, as if it's kind of funny that you have two characters who are both known for wearing masks, and in the case of Zechs, his mask was more than just physical. Like the funny thing about him saying that he's only Zechs Merquise with the mask on. Even without the physical mask, Milliardo Peacecraft was still a mask, and one with an even tighter strap on it, because it was one that he had to basically live, even despite it not believing it. I guess the best way for me to put it is something that Chuck had said, that Bruce Wayne is Batman with a mask off to protect Batman. It's not in the same vein entirely in this case, but it's close.
It's more that he's still got a mask on even with the mask off, because he just doesn't feel like he can be himself around anybody but Noin, really.
Yeah. Whereas with something like Char, even when he was going as Quattro Bagina, at the end of the day, it was his attitude with that identity was more of a prove me wrong approach.
Yeah.
Yep. Which is why we get the famous and favorite meme of the Gundam universe: I came here to laugh at you.
The funny thing
I love that meme.
The funny thing about that particular meme is the fact that when you have that particular thing in context, it ends up taking a whole other meaning, since he's saying it to Amuro, who if I recall correctly, he can't help but see it as hilarious that the guy who thoroughly kicked him and Zeon's ass countless times was looking like a shadow of who he was.
He did it as a taunt to Amuro, and in fact, it was a taunt to. It was also a sort of self-justification. It was a taunt of, see, your ideals came to nothing, which means my ideals must be better. Mm-hmm. Because Char, as much as he might change sides to address that point, doesn't change his ideal.
No, he's he's always been stuck in the exact same set of ideals that were almost indoctrinated into him by his father Zeon.
But Zeon would never have said kick everybody off of Earth. His father Zeon said new types are going to appear to facilitate humanity's movement into the stars. He took that method, that message, combined it with the entire betrayal of the Zabi family, and just turned it into this warped, twisted thing of get all the humans off Earth. That solves everything. Because clearly, genocide and all of the hardship of working in space colonies is definitely the way to get humanity to work together. Great idea!
I think I think that film tried to justify it by saying it was partially out of disgust for how the Titans acted. Except that doesn't really work either because nobody liked the Titans.
Nobody liked Ayug either.
Yeah.
This is why Londo Bell was formed in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And Londo Bell can't be everywhere at once. They are just Bright Noah on an improved white base with whatever Gundam pilots he happens to have at the time. Of course, if they somehow figured out how to take the Bright Slap and power the world with it, everybody would grow a spine.
Although, actually, we do have one successor to the Bright Slap, and it's one that I think you'll appreciate, Shades. 3 words: grit those teeth.
As much as I love Kamina, I still think Bright's got him beat in that department. Kamina had to punch Simon. Bright would have only had to backhand him. Sorry.
Oh, I'm not gonna sit here and argue that for a minute. I mean, that your logic is sound there, sir. But that's why we say it's the closest you get.
Also, I wasn't referring to the time Kamina did it. I was referring to the time Simone did it.
Oshiu?
Yep.
Which is just a generational punch at that point. I mean, technically, if we want to get there and we go into Hathaway's Flash, poor Hathaway, he gave someone a semi-equivalent of the Bright Slap to help them see the light before dying. Poor Hathaway. Poor Bright.
I just wanted to bring that up for shitposting purposes.
Of course you did.
Mm-hmm.
Of course you did.
But the other major thing when it comes to the comparison, aside from the fact that, as we mentioned, Char never really changed or re-examined his outlook when presented with new information. He did what a lot of zealots do. He reinterpreted it to filter out what didn't confirm. Confirmation bias.
Yeah.
He was bad at that.
Whereas with someone like Zechs, you have the opposite issue where he couldn't figure out which particular he had worn so many masks at that point that the question of which mask is the actual him, or is he just a selection of masks for whatever's convenient, comes into play. The issue of identity, as I mentioned before, he just has it in a different form than some other people. I'd say the only other person who I'm trying to think if there was anybody else who had a worse case of an identity issue, and I'm tempted to bring up Troa, but no, that doesn't apply.
No, because Troa, he was a guy. He didn't have an identity at first, but while he did borrow one in the form of taking the name Troa Barton, he eventually turned it into his own identity.
Mm-hmm.
He made his own identity from what he had borrowed, and to the point that by the end of the series and by the end of Endless Waltz, I don't think anyone even remember who the original Troa Barton was.
No, they just knew.
Nope.
They just knew the circus performer.
Yeah, they just know the guy who wears a clown mask and shoots everybody with a lot of DACA.
Uh-huh.
You don't have enough DACA.
I pick on Wu Fei a lot, but when I think about it, he's the one who had the main 5 who had the biggest issue with identity. Like I said, he's the big reason why I say that he was a good soldier but not a good pilot is the fact that he's not someone who I think is capable of adapting to a changing situation quickly, and that's something that is instrumental to piloting anything.
Yeah. And Endless Waltz really exemplifies that because the world had changed, he couldn't move on. He couldn't change to this new environment of peace, and thus signed up with Dakin Barton's group just so he could experience that need for war once again.
Which is why he's an asshole in Endless Waltz.
Yes,
Well,
he is.
That and something that I think the scene with Endless Waltz that really exemplifies his flaws is his fight with Hero.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the fact that he is not subtle about the fact that as long as he has a set of orders that are given to him, he'd be willing to go with a complete autocrat.
That's because he just has to fight for Nataku's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how he proved his love. He was strong. Yes, Wu Fei, that's completely what she meant when she was dying in her favorite flower bed. Totally what she meant.
But
that she wasn't strong enough for you.
The real thing that I want to focus on with this, and this is something that I actually like how the manga adaptation of Endless Waltz did it. Is
Way of the Loser?
No, the literal manga version of Endless Waltz, the one that I have on my shelf, is that he's still fighting Trays.
Well, they bring this up in the movie too, that in his mind he was even Hero points out, like, dude, in your mind you're still fighting Trays, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
And Wu Fei flat out admits it. He doesn't even he's not even trying to be, in denial about it. He knows deep down that's what this all is.
And the thing that finally snaps him out of it is seeing civilians reject Dakin.
Which was never a surprise. Everybody would have rejected him eventually.
Yeah, that was definitely the case, and more specifically, he had said battles like these are not decided by the soldiers. I.e., in his case, he finally saw that not every battle needs people like him, or requires that. But admittedly, when it comes to the whole looking at the five regarding identity, the one who tends to be the most hard to read and has always been kind of hard to read as a protagonist, period, is Hero.
Yeah, but that's because Hero's way of expressing affection is, "I'll kill you."
Yeah, when you start with that, it's kind of hard to really dig in there without getting completely confused.
Which is probably why they had to add that flashback scene in Endless Waltz to at least give him something.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do I need to bring up Frozen Teardrop or no?
That's a bit too much. Frozen Teardrop is way too much of a deep cut.
I'd also like to take a moment to address the assertion that Char got popular quick, make him a hero, but also a jerk, and that didn't go over well. So, okay, back to villain. If it were any other writer of Gundam, you might be right, but this is Kill 'Em All Tamino, the man who did not give any fucks about ratings or what Sunrise told him to do. This is a man who wrote shit into the Gundam series that got him in trouble commonly because of the fact that he didn't give fucks and said if they didn't want his story, they could fuck off. This was back when Tomino was full of piss, vinegar, and hatred for the world. Post-occupation Japan and everything that came with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, it's it's just that Char was written with his ideals in stone because Tomino's ideals at the time were in stone.
And in that regard, it's a demonstration of the wrong way to have your own ideals represented in a given character. And in a weird way, there's a part of me that wonders if Tomino is hanging out in a bar somewhere with Kobayashi.
No, Tomino actually, from what I understand these days, is much better mentally. He's much more well-adjusted, which is why Gundam The Origin did a lot to try and resolve the issues with Char. And also why a lot of Tomino's more recent writings and novelizations have been a lot more hopeful. It was already starting to trend that way in the late 80s, early 90s, especially with something like Double Zeta. And
what do you think prompted his change in attitude?
I can't know for sure. I don't know what his personal life was like at the time, but it may have just been the fact that in the 80s, the economic miracle was really taking stride in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
People were recovering, people's lives were booming. Everything was starting to come to this fantastic peak that Japan had never been at before. And it may have even gotten to Tomino too. He's still kill 'em all Tomino. The man will still do anything he wants with his characters, and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it. But he's less inclined to ide on them all. Yes, just for those of you who don't know, Tomino also wrote Ideon, Space Runaway Ideon, the show where literally the whole universe is wiped out at the end.
Didn't he also wrote another series where it's somewhat connected to Gundam, where it actually had a scene where, I'm not even going to explain that scene. I think some of you probably know where I'm going with that.
Go on.
The kid literally got decapitated by a rocket launcher. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me, honestly. I don't know the scene in question, but I'm not surprised at all.
I think it was that Janik said. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look it up tomorrow.
But when the other, I'd say the other, something else that did not exactly help when it came to Char is the fact that Char throughout his run never really had someone who truly was his equal in any regard.
Yeah, that's the biggest difference right there. And I kind of hinted at this earlier, is that Char, because he was always, he was the Red Comet, he was their best pilot, period, who could dance circles around almost everybody else until the Gundam started showing up.
And other new types in general.
He kind of developed a bit of, I don't want to say a god complex, but definitely a very big ego. And that kind of hardened his ideas. But by comparison, like I said earlier, Zechs had traits. He had someone he considered his equal, and he quickly learned through battling the other Gundam pilots that they were becoming his equals. So he kind of had that more respectful tone to him that probably helped make his personality a little bit more balanced and nuanced compared to Char.
I remember watching the Origin, and something that I ended up thinking of, and I may be wrong on this, but did it ever feel to you that the way that Char acted, especially during the Academy days came off a little bit like a sociopath.
Oh, and remember, that was when he was still just plotting revenge against the Zabi family.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that Garma was his best friend, and it's just the circumstances of your birth. The man is a sociopath.
Yeah.
I would also, to further the whole God complex thing, or at least the superiority complex thing that Shades was pointing out, Char found out very early on in his life that he was a new type. And his dad had spoken about new types. And his dad was his idol. Especially after his dad was killed and turned into his martyr figure. This, combined with the fact that he was a new type and knew early on, and was a new type that dominated the battlefield, all would have contributed to, I'm a new type, Dad said new types for the future, I must be right.
I just realized who you could make a comparison to.
Oh, yeah?
Azula.
Oh, yeah! Shit! I so see it! Holy shit!
Yes! Oh, yes.
Comparing Char Azula from Avatar.
Wait, then who would Zuko be?
Sayla.
And I know some people will bring up his relationship with Lala soon, except at most Char looked at Lala soon as a curiosity at most and a protege.
And remember, it was Amuro who actually loved Lala and didn't want to kill her. And I would also like to note that the only time we see that Char has changed his ideals and has mellowed down as a character is when he's dead and pulling his soul out of his clone at the end of Unicorn. It took Char dying to know that he was wrong.
Although,
Wait. So he had to go to Kalima, his clone.
Oh, so spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen Unicorn yet. At the end of Unicorn, when Benadryl and Full Frontal are literally traveling through time using new type powers. Thank you very much. The powers of his mobile suit start to fail him. He starts failing as a person because Benadryl truly taps into the psycho frame of his particular mobile suit, the Unicorn, and goes back to stop Grips 2 from melting the planet. And yes, because someone decided to point a colony laser at Earth again. And Full Frontal finally acknowledges that Benadryl is a better hope for the future, because this Full Frontal was not like Char. He was not actually set in his ideals. He was trying to find out which between the two of them would be the harbinger of the future. And he truly fought for it. And when he found out that he was outmatched, he stepped back. And when he stepped back, the souls of Amuro, Char, and Lala show up to escort the soul out of Full Frontal, who is already dead, and into whatever ghost form new types apparently now take, which was... Unicorn is weird. It was originally a light novel written by someone entirely not Tamino, and it was a romance light novel for the most part. Let's not forget that Benadryl literally gives up godhood for the pussy. I'm not kidding!
That's why I'm laughing, because I know you're not.
Which is funny because one of the central...
Quote Randall from Quirk the Animated Series, that's retarded.
Hang on a second, I'll be right back.
Yep.
Yeah. Benadryl, from the very beginning of the story, both the book and the show, sees this one girl falling in the colony, catches her, and becomes obsessed with this woman. So much so that even after he becomes a Gundam pilot, his whole thing is to try and find her, follow her, and help her.
I'm gonna have to counter your argument there, Sketch Therapy. That's no longer a simp. That's a stalker.
Mhm.
And she loves him. It's Stockholm Syndrome on someone's end. I'm not sure whose.
Does anybody have the alarm playing right now?
I think that's the reason I couldn't get into Unicorn. I tried watching Unicorn. I just couldn't
Oh.
do it.
I love Unicorn as a show. It's a great spectacle. Even the parts of the story that aren't Benadryl chasing after Audrey, well, especially the parts of the story that aren't Benadryl chasing Audrey, are fantastic. The mech designs are just splendid, and I love new type destroy mode. But Benadryl is a little retarded, just a tad, just a tiny bit. I think he might have fetal alcohol syndrome.
He's certainly got something.
I also would like to say that I think I've come to the decision of who's the person with Stockholm Syndrome between Audrey and Benadryl, and it's Benadryl. Audrey has had him around her little finger since the moment they met, and has manipulated him without even trying to manipulate him. Benadryl had Stockholm Syndrome full blown.
Now, I'd say getting back to that whole thing I mentioned before I had to step off when it comes to someone being an equal. What I mainly am focusing with that is someone who can be a moral center for them. And since I made the Azula comparison, and since Zuko was brought up, I'll point out that the reason why Zuko ended up being able to be as good as he was because he had somebody who was that moral center in Uncle Iroh.
If we then take the equivalent when it comes to Casval, it's Artesia/Sayla.
Mm-hmm.
Sayla was a moral center. She did not need to have a moral center. She was one. And that's what she actually gave to many of people on White Base.
But I don't think Char really had somebody to be that moral center. And no, his father does not count in this regard. Not even by a goddamn long shot. But when it comes to the other thing when it came to Char is the fact that as I mentioned before, the whole sociopath thing. Let's not forget why he takes the name Char Aznable to begin with.
Yes.
Because there happened to be on the biggest country cosplay colony in the fucking planet, or not on the fucking planet, the fucking Earth sphere. There happens to be somebody who looks exactly like him.
Yep.
That was even seeing that in the origin. That was one of those things just made me go, seriously. I realized you had to have some way for him to take on a false name, but there had to be a more elegant way to do it than this one person who just happens to look exactly like you, who you have no relationship with, and yet you're able to pull Prince in the fucking Pauper. Go ahead.
It wasn't bad art sketch. That was intentional. Another person looking just like Char was intentional. That was not bad art.
Mm-hmm. And I'd hesitate to call any of the art in Gundam the Origin bad.
True.
Maybe the CG a little bit, but I will admit I'm biased against integrating CG in a non-CG anime. But But that's a story for another day, and we know it can get worse, as I've had to learn because I'm a fucking idiot.
Did you watch? Did you actually watch X-Arm?
Yes.
Oh, why? Why? Monk!
Because it's the monk. He does this shit all the fucking time.
Monk, we warned you. We warned you.
I warned
That's the
myself.
problem. That's the problem there, Xana. We warned him. That's to him. That's a challenge.
Pretty much a siren call right there.
Additionally, Monk. Side note. You didn't bring up a certain 2016 anime there either.
No, I didn't, because I figured that would be too fucking obvious.
Well, you know what you say about low-hanging fruit. Sometimes it's worth picking up.
All right, fine. At least I'm not having to deal with. Look, I'd rather just steal the soundtrack from the 2016 anime and leave it at that.
Well, as they always say, you know, such bad CG does tend to make man wonder.
Can we call Rails yet?
Rails.
I am calling fucking Rails. I'm calling fucking Rails, and fuck you, Xana.
Wait, is that number 2? Is that number 2 or number 3 tonight? I don't know how far on the roll I am yet.
I feel
but you know, I'm having a ball. Maybe I should pilot one.
Oh God!
That's it. I'm warming up the X here.
That's okay. I can beat anybody with a ball in Battle Assault 2. So I mean, have a good day.
I would be mad at you, except for the fact that I did this exact kind of thing in Federation versus Xeon, where I beat somebody with a ball.
It's real ball busting, isn't it? You're just feeding them to me. It's so great.
You know.
Do you see why I like to shut my mouth sometimes?
Shades.
No one can ever complain about my puns again.
Shades. Do you remember a while back when we watched How Heavy Are the Dumbbells You Lift and how I ended up starting a running gag throughout that? I feel like I have a second one here, which is fuck you, Xana.
No, wait, that's been a running gag since the beginning of GeekWatch. What are you talking about?
See, that's the problem. You can't make that a running gag. He likes that too much. That doesn't work.
Yeah, that's the problem. Also, god damn it, Ian.
Oh, good Lord.
So even with that, when it, I do think that the biggest advantage that someone like Zechs is going to have in their corner, even though we've acknowledged the whole BL thing, which I'm not sure if they ended up going back to that habit after the fact.
I haven't checked their later works.
Is the fact that you're having it written by somebody who is not trying to have a character be a vessel for their particular beliefs.
Yeah.
The big reason that I'm never a fan of that kind of thing is when people are obviously going to be very attached to their particular beliefs. And the problem is, for a good story that is going to involve characters, themes, and what have you, you need to have a counterweight. You need to have somebody who is on the opposite end of the equation that is going to question and challenge that belief. You look at any good chamber play, and you have exactly this kind of thing. And if you need a classic example, or at least a classic example for me, 12 Angry Men.
Yep.
I love that movie.
I prefer the original, but the remake from the 2000s isn't too bad either.
I watched the original.
But But when you are presenting a belief that you have a personal attachment in that regard, you are far less inclined to write something in to challenge it. And because of that lack of inclination, the work is going to inevitably suffer. That's the reason why I keep poking fun at Kobayashi. And when it but even with that particular background, that's when it comes to the writer of Wing having a background in BL, the only way that it's not like that is it certainly is reflected in certain lines or motifs or the like, and everybody's made fun of that, but that's as far as it really goes.
Yeah, it definitely painted some of the character dynamics in very specific ways. I look at Catra and Troa's certain scenes with those two, and you could tell the creator was trying to ship them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Do I say it?
It also has to do with the fact that there were certain other character interactions, Hero and
Yeah.
that he wasn't very good at.
No. It was clear they were trying to create a relationship with those two, but if you're just looking at it casually, you're like, those two look like they hate each other.
No, the whole thing with Relina is save me, Hero, but don't kill anyone doing it. And then Hero, I'll kill you. That's
dumb.
their dynamic.
That is still dumb.
It was.
If I can be perfectly honest here, if I want to go back to Gundam Wing, I don't go to the anime. I go for the Endless Waltz Glory of the Losers manga, which is actually better.
Even with that, the other thing that I want to take into account is I have to cut a small bit of slack, simply because of the fact that doing character focused dramatic writing is not an easy thing to do. I'd say it's significantly harder than other writing mediums.
Mm.
I remember the film Monsters by directed by Gareth Edwards, the same Gareth Edwards who would later create the biggest cock tease ever with his Godzilla movie. What was advertising that he was going to be doing a character focused monster film. The problem is the characters were awful. So, and it's not like Gareth Edwards is a bad director or writer. It's just sometimes people punch above their weight class.
Sometimes an idea does not hit the mark.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. Sometimes those things have to happen.
Yep. You got to stumble every once in a while before you can finally get your bearings.
Yeah. And I would rather someone try and stumble than not try and bore me.
Definitely preferable.
And it's for those reasons that I end up taking this sort of preference. And there's also the fact that as much as I enjoy Char and as much as I enjoy Tomino, I do feel like you have a case where people have a very design by gospel attitude when it comes to his writing and his work. The same way that people have with a lot of originals with any long running entry. This idea that the way that they did it is the only way it should be done.
Which is not anything Tomino would have wanted.
No.
Remember, again, as I pointed out, Tomino is the guy who told Sunrise to fuck off if they didn't want his story in his way.
Mm-hmm. if I want to use an example of this sort of thing, I'd go with. I remember someone making a primitive version of what would be nowadays a Common Writer wiki, but they stopped at um at Kuga. And the reason that they stopped is they felt that they felt that all the writers afterwards were not representing the um, Ishinomori's ideal of the hero of justice.
Not all heroes of justice are the same.
Yeah,
Even Ishinomori would have said that.
and the reason why I like taking a giant piss on people's nostalgia is not the case of is not me trying to pull some Kylo Ren let the past die shit. It's more of the fact that I find people look at the past far too uncritically. Now, now the people who look at the past there's a way to do this the other end, and that's the people who look at with such a critical eye in as if to dismiss everything in the past. You know, the ideologue types.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, slavishly adhering to what came before does not do you any favors either.
Do you want to know another good example I see of people trying to slavishly adhere to previous ideals?
What?
Even though I personally did not like the concept, Majin Kaiser's skull. A lot of people were naysayers about Majin Kaiser's skull simply because this is nothing like what Go Nagai did with Mazinger and Great Mazinger and Majin Kaiser. And then I belatedly tell them, well, Majin Kaiser was originally, thought up in Super Robot Wars, and then Go Nagai ran with it. But you do you, I guess. Majin Kaiser's skull did a very, very, very different take on the Mazinger formula, and I gave it its day in court. Personally, was not for me. I understand that not everything is going to appeal to me, but it wasn't because this is not Mazinger. It was just I didn't resonate with the idea, and I saw so many people online going, "This isn't Mazinger. This wasn't what Mazinger was about," and I was just like, "Guys, it's still Mazinger."
I do find it kind of ridiculous that people got that mad over what was essentially a one-off, a 3-episode one-off.
I personally couldn't get into it. I don't know why, and I probably should go back and give it another watch since it's been a while.
Yeah,
I gotta get going, guys.
All right, Kier, stay frosty.
Nah,
Sketch, I am not going to be comparing Mazinger to Gundam because that is a pointless comparison.
yeah, that's apples to oranges, really.
Yeah, saying Gundam better than Mazinger is a personal opinion.
And given how one is clearly taking its inspirations from Heinlein and similar styles of science fiction, and the other isn't.
Yeah.
Hell, it's literally comparing two different genres of anime because Mazinger is one of the main super robot anime, and Gundam was literally the series that codified real mecha. They're two completely different genres. You try and compare the two would be impossible.
It'd be like trying to compare Macross to Gao Gaigar. It'd be like trying to compare any real robot to any super robot. Now, comparing Macross to Gundam, that would be interesting.
That would be interesting. It's one of those that it's going to be tricky to do because of how much Macross is harder to get. Fuck you, Harmony Gold.
Seriously.
Yarhar Fiddle-dee-dee.
Tatsunoko, would you just hurry up and stop giving them the frickin' license already, or is there some kind of forever deal you guys made that you regret?
Unfortunately, there isn't some procedural error they can take advantage of, like what happened with Canon Films.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is or not. I'm not. I'm a little bit of a poor layman when it comes to IP law in Japan. Well, I'm barely a poor layman as it is when it comes to IP law in the States. I do think, but the reason why I have this approach is I've um I've seen what happens when when one person's vision exceeds all reason, even when they're far too focused on maintaining tradition for its own sake. And I will give two examples. One of them is from my particular area of expertise, and one of them is a more general thing. The first case is rifts. And I know I've brought up rifts in the past, but I do feel it's apropos here.
Bringing up that Palladium book.
The reason I bring up rifts is that rifts has been using the exact same system since the 90s. Since the early 90s, it's been using the exact same set of mechanics with no rebooting, with no retooling, and all the same and compounding the same problems that it had decades ago, and it still has. Which
I think the only thing you could argue is that Rifts adds new rule sets with each Splat book.
Except at that point, it's like the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Yeah, you're already building on a bad foundation.
Mm-hmm. The other example I want to give, and that has not as much of a long-running issue, is the first two seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation, when Roddenberry got kicked upstairs regarding the movies. And most Trek fans do not like, even diehard TNG fans do not like the first two seasons, and for good reason. Roddenberry was high on his own hubris about presenting what he viewed as the true vision of Star Trek. And in both cases, you have this romanticized idea of the creator's original vision being the one true way. And I think we've seen this in more than our fair share of fandoms. Except the problem is, ideas change. And we'll probably end up getting this in the future. Another good example of this kind of thing is the Neo Saban era.
Oh God.
And yes, I am strongly considering doing a postmortem episode on that era, because it has this exact same issue. They wanting to recreate the original, because that's the true way it should be done, not all these pretenders to the throne. But the problem is, well, romance is overrated. So putting it in a romantic light has that problem. And I do think that a lot of stories that can stand tests of time are ones that have a more collaborative attitude. I think the reason Tomino was able to get away with it for so long was because of the fact that nobody had the spine to actually call his bluff, until they finally did. And because of that, you had interpretations that weren't so cemented in his particular series Bible. Because that's something that you do need. You do need an outside perspective. Otherwise, you can have a writing process that starts to get, for lack of a better term, incestuous.
Yep.
Now where this where this comes back to the whole thing with Zechs and Char is like I said, with Char we have the notion of being as we said, being an avatar for Tomino's beliefs at the time. And we have the fact that those beliefs were ironclad because Tomino was in his "I don't give a fuck" stage.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that what really ended up changing him was just getting space from the creative process.
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Obviously, the only way that I'm going to be able to figure it out is to ask him, and that's never going to happen.
I'm going to laugh if that ever happens.
Yeah, if it ever happens, I'll end up finding you dead because you'll have laughed yourself to death.
Excuse me, you won't end up finding me dead. You'll end up finding me laughing maniacally because it'll have been my master plan all along.
Fuck you, Xana. You are not Xanatos.
Or am I? I might have some gargoyles on a giant building for you. Can I interest you in buying some timeshares for it?
With friends like these, who needs enemies?
Right?
But also as a bit of an aside, I will say this: I like the Epion's design more than I do the Sazabi.
Most people do. The Epion's design's more interesting. Plus, it transforms into a two-headed dragon.
Yeah. The wing design sticks out. It's got a nice symmetrical design. Nothing sticks out too much aside from the wings. And then of course you've got that badass whip of his.
Mm-hmm.
The heat rod.
The heat whip that basically will cut through anything like a hot knife through butter.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, I think the Sazabi's got one thing with the funnels, but then again, how many Gundams have had funnels now?
Yeah.
Well, let's be clear here, though. The Sazabi and the new Gundam at the time were the only two funnels.
I'm just saying that particular aspect has kind of lost its luster in hindsight. At the time, yes, hottest thing out there, but not as hot as it used to be. But how many Gundams have we seen with a freaking laser whip?
Not all that many.
I can think of one other.
Are you about to say Tall Geese 3?
No. Kowloon Gundam from Mobile Fighter G Gundam when he uses his beam cloth.
That's still slim pickings.
But I'm not wrong. Damn it.
You're not wrong, but if that's the best you got with it, then that's saying a lot.
And even then, that's a bit of a stretch. You're not entirely wrong, but it's a bit of a stretch.
Also, when it comes to something like the Sazabi, oh my shoulder pads.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Nightingale is no different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a bit bulky in comparison. I like the slightly more slimmed down Epion design. Especially when
something to take into account is that the reason I bring up Heinlein when it comes to inspirations with Gundam is that Gundams were originally supposed to be more akin to power armor than mecha.
That's true.
And when you look at the codified design of the cockpit, that's still somewhat applicable. Because it's more about arm and leg manipulation using AI assistance. I do recommend people look at that one video that was this 360-degree look at a simulated Gundam cockpit.
Which Gundam was it in that video?
I think it was either GM or RX-78.
Because if it's RX-78-2 or GM, those cockpits should not have the linear chairs, which is what I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
But that's just me now, nitpicking as a Gundam nerd to nitpick as a Gundam nerd. Linear chairs didn't exist until upgrades. I believe Gundam Mark II was technically the first linear chair.
Yeah, it's been a while since I saw the video, so don't quote me on that.
It's okay. Now I have to look it up because I'm starting to doubt myself.
Yeah. But the 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 big the if there's any real takeaway from this sort of thing, it's that just is that consider this another instance in why I have such a vehement distaste for the phrase clone in discourse on fiction. Or clone, ripoff, or whatever you want to refer to it, because there has been more than one occasion where I've seen people look at multiple characters in non-Tomino Gundam works and refer to them as a Char clone. And
I think the Gundam Wiki puts it best. Like, it still refers to them as Char clones in the wiki, but it's actually, that's only just a sub name because, yeah, that's what everyone calls them. But they refer to Char as the progenitor of an archetype, which I think is a much better definition for a lot of these later versions.
And the thing with an archetype is that the first is not always the default best. You know, we've seen that. Does anybody want to read the first appearance of Superman? or the actual first superhero movies with those silent Batman and Robin movies? Not the first Batman movie that we all know and grew up with. I'm talking about the ones in the black and white days when it was silent. Only the hardest of the hardcore want that, which is why they have to try and get clever when advertising the DVDs of them at supermarkets.
That's right. Yeah, the linear floating seat was first introduced with Gundam Mark II, and then later in Gundam Alex.
Yeah, but I think that's as good as any of us of a spot to wrap it up on this particular episode of GeekWatch. We will be back here. We'll be back here next week with something that probably won't generate as much salt, but we will find a way to drive each other crazy as we always do here.
That's particularly easy for me.
Yeah. I do have an interesting set of interviews this week. There's one that I'm gonna have to reschedule because my computer decided to fuck up midway through recording. But tomorrow, the developers of Parsling's Avarice should be coming back. Tuesday, I'll have the guy behind the SCP RPG, and I have to correct myself. There have been a few instances of a SCP RPG in the past, but a lot of them didn't really go as far as this one is. And some of them were using established systems, even if the established systems make me tilt my head. Like, I think I saw one that used Powered by the Apocalypse, and I'm like, that's not a good idea. Wednesday, I'll have the developer of Kingdom Gun on. That was the game I brought up yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we can find a way to send a copy over to Tier of Grace so he can suffer. Thursday is Paul Starr, the guy behind the Zodiac War board game. Friday, CJ Thompson is coming back, and the sole reason I'm able to get him back that late is because Chinese New Year. Then he's 14 hours ahead of me. And Saturday, the devs for Overture. Also on Saturday, the return of Monastery Gazette. So that's what we have to look forward to down the line. But as always, I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their schedule for coming on. And there's going to be plenty of madness all throughout the month because hey, hey, doing this keeps me distracted, so I'm not plotting to kill Cupid.
Mm.
But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.